Good morning and welcome to our South by Southwest panel on the power of design leadership to transform business. Instead of holding it in Austin due to COVID-19, we decided to put it online at the same time as the event would have happened in Austin. This panel discussion and debate was in response to the recent wave of reports on how to harness the value of design, like the McKinsey report and the InVision report. And is centered specifically about the most recent research and report released by the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech. This panel at South by Southwest was designed to be at the workplace track for two reasons. One, the report that we put together focuses on the next step, how to maximize design resources across organizations, both vertically, so within design teams and design talent, and also horizontally, how to train design thinking competencies across the organization. And second, because the research was syndicated by 6 large design leaders that you see here at the bottom right of the page, of which 3 of them are here represented on the panel. I'm here with these design leaders, and our goal with you is to share the findings, but more interestingly, to debate the actions to pursue the opportunities that are outlined in the report. My name is Dennis Weil, and I am the Dean of the Institute of Design. I should be on the screen. The institution that has done the research for the report. So I'm agnostic and not partial, and as a result, I'm playing the role of moderator today. Just to share a little bit on the school, so you know the frame of mind that I'm bringing to this conversation. The Institute of Design at Illinois Tech is the sole graduate-only professional design school in the US, modeled after other professional design schools like law, medicine, and public policy. Our focus is therefore not on training technical skills, the how of the design practice, but we are focused on the what, working towards solving today's biggest problems, and the why, ensuring that we build responsible, cooperative, and intelligent futures. This is what led us to our interest in the research Leading with Purpose report. So let's start, and let me now have each of our panelists share their unique viewpoint with you. Each of the panelists comes from an organization that believes in design, but focuses their resources differently based on the nature of their business, organizational culture, and leadership beliefs. So we will ask each panelist to share with you what works best for their organization. We are going to start with Nathan Ryer, COO of Philips Design, one of the largest and most diverse design organizations in the world, with over 500 designers, representing every design discipline across its 11 global studios. As its title says, Philips Design is a centralized structure with a chief design officer. So Nathan, can you please share with us your best practices on how to manage large design organizations to get the most value out of the 500 team members in your group?
Thanks, Dennis. Great to be here today and share this in an online forum. I have to say, I'd much rather be in sunny Austin, enjoying the festival, but as it was canceled, it's great to do this in an online forum and test this out with everyone here today, how this format works. I have a feeling we'll be doing a lot more of these in the near term with everything that's going on. But yeah, I think this is a great dialogue we'll have today, and starting sort of with the topic of, you know, how design is organized. I think there'll be a bit of talk about design at scale. Certainly that's the challenge we have at an organization like Philips. Philips is over 125-year organization. Design, in many respects, has been a part of the company. There's actually been a design function in the company for over 95 years. And with that, there's sort of layers of history of how design has organized itself inside of our company. Philips itself is undergoing a massive transformation as a company to becoming a very focused healthcare technology company. So many of the things it was known for, such as manufacturing light bulbs and televisions, it no longer does. And so that with that comes the transformation towards serving as a design organization, lots of different kinds of healthcare technology focused businesses. And we, with our 500 designers, spread out across that whole entire organization. And so for us, it really is that question of how do you scale? And for us, we really do try to focus as we grow and scale to focus on the value and shared outcomes. Because in the end, design as a discrete function only has its value if it has a shared goal with all of the businesses that it's in. And I think that's a lesson that we learned as we added that chief design officer role in the last, well, it's been the last 10 to 20 years even that we've had the role, but I think it's become very focused as in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years, where we're really focused on embedding design as a function very much into the business and focusing on that shared outcome. And a lot of the things that were found in the report that you all and we sponsored together is that having those roles really tightly integrated with the organization and focused on that shared outcome, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about it as we get the panel going, it was super important for us because, yeah, you can have this sort of spread that happens over the organization, but what we found at Philips, I'm curious what the others think, is that designers, as they spread out, can tend to start working alone. And a designer working by themselves in a business is not necessarily a happy designer. So you have to be really careful, even as you spread out designers to serve across an organization, that they don't lose their soul, so to speak, and that you keep the soul of the design's value intact as you go out and serve. And in our case, in one business cluster alone, we have over 300 different applications that we're trying to make sense of, and so that really becomes important for us. But yeah, so it's that whole centralized partnership that you hear talking about in design leadership circles, and we're trying to execute that every day as we build structures up to support a global reach with 10 different design studios roughly around the world, where we're building up these centralized partnerships with the businesses we serve.
Nathan, and you mentioned that what's important is that the goals are tightly integrated. What are the goals? Are they kind of more design goals, experience goals? What are those shared goals, this design-driven goals that need to be tightly integrated?
Yeah, I think it's both, right? So we'll have goals of our design organization, which are more experience-focused, but and those would be rather typical ones in terms of serving our design community, growing their competencies, career path focused. And developing hybrid design skills. I think those would be common across maybe everyone on this panel. But then, yeah, we need to put into actually annual performance plans for designers working in a particular business. They'll have business-related goals. So if there's an aspiration for a particular business, let's say within medical imaging, it's our precision diagnostics. If they have a certain product that they're looking to scale or launch in a particular year, the designers will be aligned with those particular goals. So it's always that balance between value creation and capability development. We kind of look at those two sides of the coin and do our best to balance that in our organization.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's move next to Brandon Schauer, former head of enterprise design at Capital One until a month ago, and now SVP for the US climate change at RARE, a global leader in catalyzing behavioral change to achieving enduring conservation results. So Brandon, can you please bring to life to us how you and the teams at Capital One are maximizing the value of design with a very different, dispersed but networked group of resources?
Sure. It's helpful to just give a bit of history on Capital One. It's basically 2 Googles old, if you think about it in lifespan, which is really young for a bank. That leads it to be very tech-centric. And but we have multiple lines of business, from credit cards to bank accounts, checking, savings, auto loans, those sorts of things. When I joined Capital One as CEO of Adaptive Path, they had acquired us. At that time, the whole design group was with us thrown in probably just shy of 100 folks maybe. Over the past 5 years, then it grew in size to be comparable to the Philips team, so 500 plus in terms of scale. And during that change, the group I eventually came to lead over the past 2 years was called Enterprise Design. And it was this team that was really putting together the final pieces of the experiences as they went out to the door whenever we needed to appear as a whole company to a customer. So the integrated app where all those lines of businesses serve customers, the integrated website, and all these other touch points where it needed to be integrated for the customer. But what's happened over the past 2 years was a real change from that design team being focused and bringing and integrating things and building the final features to flipping from focus on features to a focus on platforms, and a focus on systems, so that we can enable much the rest of the organization to start delivering those capabilities. And that really changed the nature of how we thought of what the designer should do, from designing an end feature to designing an enabling system, designing the pieces and parts that still delivered great experiences to the end customer, but we ourselves weren't always the ones really crafting the final pieces. And so that really changed the notion of how we impacted the business.
What were the biggest shifts in that?
Oh, I would say the first hardest shift was just the change in mentality. The team thought of itself in the early days as the defenders of high quality experiences. And to change that mental shift to actually we're enablers, we are the champions of great experiences, even if we aren't the ones finally crafting the detail. And so that takes on more of a systems mindset of how do we design processes and tools and rules and understanding and visions for everyone to improve how they do the work, rather than you yourself crafting it. It was a much better or much different mindset of designing systems rather than designing individual features. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Brandon. And last but not least, we would like to welcome Shelby Kimmen, Learning and Community Director at D-Ford, the Ford Motor Company. Shelby, can you describe to us how you and your team at D-Ford are approaching this massive culture change to bring and maximize the value of strategic design to an organization with 200,000 employees? It's very impressive. We'd love to hear about it.
Thank you. I've just been told I have unstable internet connection, so I hope this comes across okay. You know, I think it's interesting when we start talking about scaling design thinking across the enterprise. It automatically, whenever you talk about scaling anything, that you're taking a thing and replicating it. And the very notion I'm thinking is really about tools and mindsets, fit for purpose, and this idea of practice. So when we talk scaling design thinking at Ford, we're not talking about having a number of classes or teaching experiences, or dare I say the word training. It's much more about finding people where they're at and working with them with the tools and the methods in situ of real business problems. So that something extra over on the side, but actually pretty deeply embedded. And so the team I lead is a range of deep practitioners, as well as people with coaching and facilitation experience, in addition to more instructional design. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And pretty exciting. And by the way, I have to give a shout out to Tavi, who was in the window earlier. This wouldn't be the internet without cats. So
nice.
Love a good cat.
Dennis, I think you're on mute.
My apologies. Shel, the teams you described, are they centralized or are they distributed? to lead those tasks of deep practitioner coaching and instructional design?
Yes. It's both. I mean, part of what makes this position and this opportunity so exciting to me is it's not possible to do it with a single organization. It has to be about building up a community. So there are many people across the company that may not be a part of our organization, which is D4, and the Human-Centered Design organization of Ford. There are many people across the company with all kinds of experience and various design thinking, whether it's experience with Agile or Lean UX or digital design or service design. And they're inspired and excited by this movement. And so the goal is to take those people from across the company and bring them together, less like a community of practice and more like a movement. And so there are people with every range of skills that are doing that. And we're just now trying to figure out how is it that we function as a larger entity? How do we break that down, come together? It's just a very interesting time right now for the company.
Great. So a question to all the panelists now that we have had this very interesting introduction from three very big design organizations, and this idea of it's not about community of practice, it's a movement, the idea of having very clear goals that are both design driven but also business driven, and the idea of moving from dreamers to champions. What are some of the commonalities that you have noticed among the three of you? And what are some of the differences? So give me either an idea of something you heard about a commonality or a difference.
Well, I'm curious. I was going to ask Brandon. I mean, who crafts the details in the end? Because you said it's not like some of the details are left behind. Because it's definitely something at Philips. You know, and it's over the years probably goes back and forth a bit. But it's always a sacrifice if you sort of walk away and say, okay, we're going to leave that particular business line or business group on their own, quote unquote. You know, to do their own detailed work. Because that's how internal design teams get so massive, is that they want help, and help sometimes comes, or at the beginning it sometimes comes in, just help me design this thing, and that often is detail. So that triggered me to say, you know, who crafts the details? Is it someone else? Is it part of the central design organization? Do you sort of leave the business on their own to do that with other third parties? I'm just curious your answer to that.
Yeah, there are line of business design teams with design leaders there who are, you know, building out the details there in partnership. I think is the idea of how far do you extend kind of the design system model. Right. Like, hey, we built a design system. We've baked in all the right things for accessibility and everything, so no one has to think about what a button looks like anymore. Right. And to what extent do you design that for our entire platform of a website or an AI bot or a web app? And so how easy do you make it to put those pieces and parts together and still try to imbue that system with some sense of design principles, right, for example, so that you still get an experience that you're intending to find. I think we definitely went through the wave of everyone has a design partner and everyone's embedded together with their product and tech team. And it still is that way today, but I think we ended up with a more variable experience. Right. Across it. Each individual experience was good, but it didn't necessarily add up to an entire Capital One feel.
But how strong is your loop back into the central team? Because we also have a lot of discussion about just making the loop back to the central, like feedback from the sort of the federated model of, you know, getting either changes back to the central system or being able to revise those principles on a fairly regular basis. Because yeah, as design, you know, we're talking about inflection. I think one of the themes of this talk is inflection. Part of the inflection I've seen is design is spreading out everywhere, but you want to maintain that strength in the center somehow, but it's not too strong, or that constant debate, right?
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I've said governance in 2019. I like that was like the word that just constantly
Right.
falls out of like, hey, how do we feel like we're steering the ship together, but still there needs to be someone who's the decider, but we're making decisions in the open, transparently, so you understand the why we made the call we did. I don't know, how are you solving some of these problems, Shell?
I mean, I think we're in some ways we're in an earlier place, right? We've gotten to, I think, getting close to 200 designers globally, and right now we're still centralized and taking our projects that are most strategically business. So we're really following the strongest business demands, and then making sure that we have our top talent focused on those areas. While in parallel, I'm growing the community movement alongside of that, to help, for lack of a better word, triage some of the areas that also need help and support, but may not have the sort of strategic imperative. And because we can't scale, I mean, the company is just too large to, have a central or even a decentralized. It's really got to be, there has to be someone within arm's reach, no matter who I am, where I am, that knows something more about the question I have than I do. And so figuring out what that infrastructure is, what that human-to-human infrastructure is, and how people can play into that is, I think, going to unlock this tension between a centralized organization or a federated organization.
And what disciplines does that cover, Shell? So, I mean, I can imagine the origins of Ford have always included designers, but is it that your central team is focusing on a particular kind of transformational aspect of design leadership and design thinking and more?
Nathan, you went on mute somehow.
Oh, I gotta do an audio check. You guys can't hear me.
We got you now.
Okay.
Last heard you at the different kinds of designers.
Yeah. So, yes, Ford has a long history of, that's Echo. Hi, Echo.
I'm back, sorry.
Ford has a long history of, okay. Did you want to finish your question? We only
No,
bits about.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I think you got it. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, our teams are built of the same sort of crafts that I think all of our teams have, which is a variety of product and in interaction and communication, designers, design research, etc. We are, however, working in integrated teams with people from marketing, from engineering, from advanced research and engineering, and other stakeholders across the company, depending on what the project is. When we talk about bringing in these community members, they usually are playing one of their roles, right? They usually are in engineering or marketing. And what we're trying to do is give them the tools and help with the mindsets so that they can walk into those rooms and lead us a design-led strategic discussion.
Got it.
Necessarily being a designer. Yeah, the goal isn't to grow thousands and thousands of designers. The goal is to get strategic tools into the hands of people that need them so that they can help their teams navigate.
Makes total sense, yeah.
Great, so I think we have a good discussion on internally how to use the resources to maximize, and it was very interesting to see that mostly while you are still at different stages and different structures, you're applying very similar approaches, which is the idea of champions of movement of goals and not necessarily control and centralized management. So now I would like to suggest that we move a little bit forward on the recommendations from the report and look at those a little bit more in detail. So as I think Nathan already shared, the report really thinks that design is at an inflection. On one starting point for the reason of the research was that, and particularly that on one side, design is getting commoditized. It's getting de-skilled through a horizontal spread of design thinking. While at the same time, as we've seen, and I think what Ford is driving and all of you are driving, is design becoming more critical and more involved in more complex and strategic issues or platforms and infrastructure, as Brandon mentioned, particularly all the way to emerging tech, in the civic issues and up to policy. So I'm going to show one slide from the report that kind of indicates that as we are moving as companies move from shareholder to stakeholders, we think that there might be a contribution that designers can contribute to that. And basically the designers could become stewards of purpose and manager of the purpose balance sheet or the ESG goals in an organization. The same way finance has moved over since 1980s from kind of accounting, bookkeeping to becoming the steward of the financial health and balance sheet of an organization. And if you think about, all of you talked about experience and purpose are related. Purpose is kind of one level higher up from the experience, because the experience brings to life the purpose of the organization. So I think what the research report recommended from the interviewees, which were designers and non-designers that work with designers, is that designers are uniquely qualified to help deliver this shift from shareholders to stakeholders 3 ways. 1, by leading engagement with stakeholders. Design does that for a living. 2, by making the purpose more visible and tangible. So translating what the purpose or the vision an organization claims to actually make it real, so that large people, 200,000 people at Ford, can actually understand what are we going after. And then 3rd, defining innovation metrics, and that's on the slide you see, that need to shift and adding sustainability and just and inclusive, in addition to our traditional measures for innovation on desirable, viable, and feasible. So starting with Nathan, who is the only one of the companies who has a chief design officer, and therefore at the C-level, you need to own something. What do you think this is a wishful dream, or do you think that is something that design really is uniquely qualified and can take ownership for in your view and in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've been involved working together on these findings, and particularly have found that particular chart fascinating, because it's actually something, as we've been working on the vision of our own design organization the last year, we were on very much the same path. So it's one of those nice things where kind of validated for us that we're on the right track, which is the role of design in taking a broader view on not only inclusivity, but ultimately sustainable business practices. So we sort of mapped that out on our own 3 horizons strategy, using kind of McKinsey's simple 3 horizon framework, and said, where do we want to be in X number of years? And in the end, we realized that kind of the table stakes is to create seamless experiences, to strive for solutions across healthcare, but ultimately where we need to end up, and where we believe, because we are so focused on users, that's where we are as a steward of the end user across the organization, is we can drive circularity in design and circularity in product development. And we realized, wow, holy crap, if we do that, how do we have to radically change the kind of people we hire, this kind of skill sets we have within our design organization? Because, for example, to create a fully circular MRI machine, it requires completely different skill sets than what you'd have in an industrial design of a designer of 5-10 years ago, who was really just focused on the surface, 3D surface experiences, or even a software experience. It just really changes our thinking. And then second piece to all of this is, at a sort of company level, we really mapped the whole company's goals to what's called the Quadruple Aim, which is a fairly standard healthcare sort of industry target. So it's not that we invented it, but we've definitely made it our own, and that's really focused on improved healthcare outcomes, lower cost of care, and then even most importantly, the last two, which is really important for us in design, is patient experience and staff experience. And so we've kind of wrapped our whole design organization around driving at least the patient and staff experience ones, although we think our design capabilities can map really tightly also to reducing the cost of care, just by being more efficient in the way we help design services, products, solutions, etc. So yeah, maybe a longer answer than necessary, but this is a really passionate one for us because yeah, design, I think traditionally was seen, especially in large organizations, maybe in traditionally engineering-based organizations, which Philips is one, as an obstacle, as a cost, an added cost in the product development process. And it's difficult to prove your value in that environment, although, you know, when you've been around 90 years as a design function, you hopefully get good at it. But moving towards being able to bring things like inclusivity and circular into it, I think it really brings a whole new dimension to the value you can add. So this is a huge one for us.
And does Philips have a purpose statement, you know, and is it, do you use it for design?
Yeah, I mean, the top of the pyramid is to impact the lives of 3 billion people by 2030. So that's really the highest level mission statement of the company. And the other things I was just mentioning really all filter below that. It's a complex organization, so there's a lot of different principles and statements and things underneath that, depending on the organization. But at the very top of the pyramid is impacting and improving the lives of 3 billion, basically touching the lives of 3 billion people by 2030.
Great.
So
And before I open up, just want to pass it on to Shell, because automotive industry and mobility industry, as it's called now, has obviously gone through a major purpose shift. So perhaps can you share a little bit about the purpose shift at Ford and how you think design can play a role or can really contribute and help bring this to life?
Yeah, I mean, it's been remarkable. I've been with the company for 4 years, and in that 4 years, the game has changed dramatically, and we've gone from you know, being a great car company to aspiring to be the most trusted company in the world. And that's a really big shift, and that's by creating smart vehicles in a smart world. So really looking at the whole digital ecosystem and relationship of hardware, software, and services. So that in itself is just a massive change. In terms of design and our role in that change, certainly we bring tools, basic tools, right? Structural tools to help people align with principles like trust. But I think more fundamentally, design isn't about owning a piece of the business equation, right? Like finance owns money and marketing owns customer desire or demand, and engineering owns, you know, the creation of a product. I think what design is bringing is the paradigm shift, right? And we're bringing none of us can own anything without the other, right? So I lean really heavily into that inclusivity bubble, because I think you can't have a meaningful, fulfilled purpose without it. And I think design by its nature and construct and the types of tools that we use necessitates that we think differently about what it is we are delivering to the stakeholder. And it's not this thing and this thing and this thing. It's a comprehensive whole. So it's much more about a connector.
Thank you. So Brandon, up to you. What's your reaction to those two point of views from your colleagues?
Yeah, I think, you know, Capital One also has a great purpose and vision as well. I think what in reality is hard to do is that gets translated very quickly into what are we getting done this quarter and what are the business results.
Yeah.
And so I find that designers are naturally inclined to be about inclusion and empathy and bringing justice to the work they do. But sometimes it can fall on, it can feel tone deaf when you're or it can feel like nagging or being a complainer when you're not also showing up with clear reasons why that's going to be a business concern, and ways to solve for that, ways to actually measure some of these things, just like we would measure, you know, an ROI business outcome. Because otherwise it's hard to kind of treat it at the same level. I mean, yes, we have the CEO of BlackRock saying, I'm going to get out of businesses that don't feel like they have a sustainable edge to it, but that just hasn't trickled through the economy yet in a way that we're treating it with the same importance. So while I think it's cool that we're thinking out there and we're putting the building blocks together, it's really hard for us to bring that down to the team level.
Yeah.
Quarterly resolution to make it happen.
Very true.
Very true. So the question to all of you, so you're saying cool. So if it's an aspiration that's just cool, then it's probably not very helpful. If it's an aspiration that we believe is preparing both design role and the organization for the future, then it's something that should be pursued. So where do you think the aspiration is? Is it just a cool thing that sounds good and it's a fad and will go away? Or do you think, a little bit like this inclusiveness comment from Shell, the design about inclusion and paradigm shift, is that what we should use and ride the wave of ESG and purpose-driven to kind of bring that paradigm shift to life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to the metrics, right? And the questions that you ask of yourself. And more that we can shift our metrics to help clarify the shift in values that going not just through any individual company, but through the world right now. And think about different ways to quantify impact. Then inclusivity and sustainability won't be cool or an outlier. It'll be fundamental to how we determine value. And as as I think about, I mean, we're still just reeling through a crazy 2019 and then going into crazy 2020, and what are our real hard metrics, trying to balance that with this future vision of, okay, how do we show that we're actually making an impact, is much more about vocabulary change, behavior change, outlook change, and then as opposed to, Broncos, which is of course critical to our survival. So it's pretty interesting.
I think it comes down to sort of, maybe it's too trite to say it, but the tops down and bottoms up approach. So I think you have to have that high level vision. For Philips, it's about impacting, people's lives. Sounds like for Ford, it's becoming the most trusted brand. I mean, I think those kind of high level things do motivate resources, mobilize resources, and inspire teams. But then what we've seen is that having just the smallest possible pragmatic projects on the roadmap help chip away at the problem. We have a team. It started with a guy who's an intern looking at just the serviceability of some of our consumer products. He came in, this great Italian guy, started working with our factory in the north of the country, figured out how to move 2 screws on a project, and did serviceability diagrams and like re-engineered the whole process, as a designer / engineer. And it you know, reduces the return rate of projects by like 50%. I mean, this kind of massive change on a small scale, if I will, because it affects one team. It makes a huge change. That engineering team sees the value of design, and it's all about circularity because you return less products, less things go into landfills. So that's for us like circularity, design, you know, sustainability on a small scale. But all those things can mothball and have a lot of momentum. And so then we can take learnings from that and start applying in a larger medical sense, you know, bigger scale, longer term projects. But it starts with those little pragmatic projects. You're like, oh yeah, it's moving 2 screws. He was like, yeah, you just do this and that's it. I'm like, okay, great. You know, I think, but that's, you know, we've all experienced that with young designers. Like the passion that goes into that is where it starts. And it's just being able to harness that within a team. And again, that skill set is different than designer skill sets of even 5 years ago. To be that blend of design and engineering and really modular design is just not something, at least I had experienced before. It's like a developing skill set you see that can really impact that field. So pretty cool. That's what I meant by cool.
I think the challenge with the top down versus bottom up though can be, you know, having the top down decree that's necessary but not sufficient. And then the bottom up is just too darn slow, right?
Yeah.
It's like, first wait 6 projects for the project, or 6 months for the project to be done. Then, you know, market it and evangelize to everyone. Then everything's changed in the business anyway, and you feel like you got to start over. Like it's such a slow snowballing effect. And there's that missing middle to say like, hey, but we're going to lay some larger bets on some things that we think are about part of the future. And that's, I think, something that design's still getting comfortable in how to do that, like we see some of the other parts of the business.
Well, I think we read that in the report, right? These kind of roles in the middle layer, the interpreter roles, the integrator type roles in design leadership that I think have traditionally been more in the business, and now at least we've seen, and I'm curious if you guys have seen, are now being more asked from design, at least to step up and play more that business hybrid business design role. It's just becoming so much more critical to try to ladder up those small wins into that middle area that you're kind of talking about.
That's a good segue into the middle area. So let's go to the other key finding from the report. We're going to go top slowly down. And that is the designer as a protector against unintended consequences. And let me again start with sharing a slide for our audience to. The key to deliver on purpose in an organization, once an organization has clearly defined one and translated it into a compelling and shared vision, is to manage the gap that is created in the execution between what's being delivered, i.e. the effect, versus the original intent. So the report identifies new specialized design competencies to help minimize that gap, including the role of an action aligner for project teams, a parallel or a newly shaped role to a project manager that ensures that the team keeps the eyes on the prize or on the intent by filling the roles of problem framer, prober, and facilitator. So Brandon, who had kind of the role of head of enterprise design, I want to ask you, can design take on that protector of unintended consequences that are now so familiar, particularly out of Silicon Valley and technology, and Facebook being a key example, killing democracy or being accused of that? And do designers in your organization already start playing this, or in your past organization, start playing these roles? And if yes, how are they playing them?
Yeah, I think there is difficulty, as I said before, in playing the protector role where you come across as nagging or not being business savvy and all those points. I think we have had our getting to moderate sized bets on their places where teams can really have an impact in that role, data ethics being one of them, where design teams are really leading in that. Privacy, where design teams are really integrated very tightly and strategically with product and tech partners to figure out like where does Capital One as a bank need to be with a privacy experience. And I think those are the stronger points where you can lead in versus trying to add that kind of protector of unintended consequences everywhere. I think those are strategic places where you can really bake it into the systems, into the processes, the culture that really matter, and then can catch on and spread, or just be imbued into the systems so that everyone has to practice it.
And what makes data ethics or privacy at Capital One being the area that design can go and lead without being claimed to be protected or going into other people's territories?
I think
that might be helpful to know what the criteria is.
Yeah, it's in the right pockets because the strategy is data based, right? It's data is what our company and many companies operate off of, right? And so if we can help create better rules by which our APIs, our data is actually classified, how we analyze that data to create new business decisions. If we're imbuing those sort of practices and systems with more ethics, then that's naturally part of our strategic future, rather than it being 2 or 3 clicks downstream of saying, oh, for this one particular feature, did we think through all these parts? That doesn't scale as well. That's like too late in the process to really bake it in. And I think you don't necessarily have the partners at that point who are going to share your concerns, your thoughts that stretch widely beyond just your team.
And to your partners in IT, what gives design the credibility that design is the right partner? What's the connection there?
What gives design credibility? I would say at Capital One, we tend to be a answer-driven culture rather than a question-driven culture, which I know is a big part of the report and where design can be successful. I think design has to actually have done the homework and show up with some answers, but still be collaborative in arriving at the right set of answers for the business overall. And that's a practicality of how Capital One works.
Okay. Unintended consequences, design protecting companies from unintended consequences, Phillips and Ford. How do you think about that?
Shell, you want to go first?
I mean, I don't know that it's just design that's protecting consequence. I think anyone, if we're the most trusted company in the world, then a whole lot more people than myself have to be thinking about, consequence and ethics. But I do think that because we have design talent in these new roles, in these hybrid roles that are deeply, deeply involved in the business, and I just jotted down that we're involved in our most strategic products, we're involved in this core horizontal technologies that run across everything, and we're also involved in pretty key process or knowledge work, as in using human-centered design to change the business. I think that because designers do bring these sensibilities and these ways of thinking about impact into those processes, not so much that we protect the integrity of the outcome, but I think we do have tools that help people understand what the outcome is and what the steps are to achieve it, right? So I think it's more about the frameworks and the systems design tools that we bring than the highly ethical designer, because probably lots aren't also.
Yeah, for us, unintended consequences can mean injury in many cases. I mean, not just patient fatigue or a doctor being overly tired and pushing too many buttons on a particular device or solution, but also injury, like you can have burn-in from being in an MRI too long. So yeah, I mean, there's just that compliance fact in the healthcare field that you have to design for operability in a very clinical way. It can cause damage to someone. So that's very critical. But far more than that, I think it's having the unintended consequences of not thinking of all that stuff until the very last step. You can have certain businesses not get compliance, and then there's huge financial consequences of that, of certain devices not reaching compliance. But we like to think that we can start much earlier in the process of having business leaders and product teams and product engineers think user first and not engineering feature first when developing and bringing a new solution thing to market. And that's probably the biggest value in avoiding unintended consequences in the market, because it's relatively still new to teach design thinking in business courses, and so much of the ground that we're covering is still bringing in that user thinking into some very clinical, methodical A plus B equals C always when developing a new, launching a new product, and making sure the user's voice is being heard.
I think that brings up an interesting challenge, though, of there's so much leverage in risk compliance and, you know, in a bank audit functions, right?
Yeah, very similar, right?
That's how decisions can get made, other than by things like ROI. So how do you get a designer, though, who probably didn't go to school thinking, hey, I want to work with risk and audit and compliance, to be excited about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that sense, financial services and healthcare are very similar in a lot of the process-heavy product development process. I think Philips has, you know, we have very documented, rigorous development processes, very similar to a bank. Yeah. I mean, how we get designers excited is by that mission and the purpose-driven impact that comes with being able to save lives, or at least improve lives. Yeah. And so that's, of course, the hook. But at the end, I think as designers, at least come to Philips, they are usually more often than not, getting immersed in a pretty deep clinical domain alongside their design competence. And that becomes a winning combination, because they're sitting alongside a clinical team and saying, wow, did you really think what the patient is going through when you're, you know, developing this product? Let's go talk to patients. And not that they don't, but their perspective as a designer is different in bringing in that perspective. So yeah, it's just working with them to make sure that that voice is coming in.
Yeah, Shell, I don't know if you see this at Ford, but I think that's a huge part of the action aligner kind of level, is being able to deal with some of these less well-trained topics. Yeah.
We're going to move us on because we are
almost out of time, right?
But just to answer the question about educator, you asked about design educator. So what we do on the education side now is actually getting into training designers in risk management. So we are saying, and in our classes and our teaching, it's not enough anymore to just always ask, how might we? And also, what if? And what if is a key question of the audit team and the risk management team. But asking the what if on future concepts. So when you are at the stage, at the divergent stage, and look at different concepts. So I don't think it's, because with design futures and speculative design, I think it actually, that's the whole purpose of speculative design, to an extent, to ask the question, what if? So I think it's might actually fit in if we don't approach it from as a purely scenario. It's a scenario planning instead of a actuary. We are not actuaries. We are more planners. So Shel, I'll give you a question right now. Sorry that I moved on to the next thing. But one of the key thing of the report as well was the need, or the current practice particularly, of also building generalized design competencies. So as I said, going horizontal with design, because you make a big case about inclusion and the design doesn't own anything, it's really shared. So the report really said there are three main elements that is of value based on the interviews with non-designers in organization. One is this framing problem spaces, not solution spaces. So the practice that Brandon doesn't practice, the question versus the answers. Second, the human-centered approach, which obviously includes prototyping. And third, a defined common goal, which is probably what we a little bit talked about in the unintended consequences discussion, working towards cross-functionality and the action aligner role. So one of the concerns, particularly in consulting firms and non-product companies, so it's probably mostly more Brandon, is that this horizontal training has dumbed down design and to a certain extent is putting at risk and pushing the vertical, the experienced designers, back to just being producers, as they say in the report, and not having the strategic roles, because the people who traditionally have the strategic roles now feel they have enough design skills to also bring in the design point of view. How are you thinking about that as you're building this in Ford? Because you're right at the beginning of that.
I've thought about this a lot because I can't stand the mental model that scale design somehow dumbing down design. You know, as people that have been practicing for 20 years, I think just because more have access to tools and methodologies doesn't mean that our level of discourse or practice is any less, right? So at first, I think it's an and. The challenge is very real when there are people that, you know, if they have this that they don't, it would be pretty terrible if I showed up in the powertrain department and decided I was going to be an engineer one day, right? That very bad things would happen. And so, you know, there are things that we unfortunately do have to do around credentialing and I dare I say the word badging, but some sort of accreditation that helps people understand, like, who's good at what. And that doesn't just have to be design thinking. There are strategy tools, there are software development tools, there are a whole bunch of skills that make up a large enterprise like we all work in. And being able to understand more skill basis and a combination of skill bases, who knows what, I think is much more important than who calls themselves a designer or who calls themselves an engineer.
Grant and Nathan, what's in your organizations, how do you see it developing there?
Well, I would say there's always that fear of the commoditization happening. Like you said, like, okay, because, you know, you can have certain designers kind of off being execution. I think you always have to watch for that. But as I mentioned earlier, what we see is that the hybrid designer is just everywhere. It's on the rise, which means not only because, you know, universities like yours, you know, institutions like yours are training that in the curriculum, but also because real life, I think in large organizations, designers are finding themselves in situations where they need to lead more. The problems are more complex, whether it's just leading a meeting, leading a workshop, leading an effort. It's all different kinds of leadership. And that requires a more diverse skill set. I think, yes, there still is the production aspects of design. That's why I asked Brandon, you know, where does the detailed craft happen? Sure, there are agile teams and there are screens and products and things that need to get built. But I think even inside of that, in the agile squad model, there's always going to be a designer that steps up and says, well, what about the research? If we looked at this, and so there's always that designer that sort of steps up and leads. And I think there's just even more opportunity for that than ever for designers to lead. And so it's really just a question back on this group right here is like, what are we doing to enable designers to lead, the ones that sort of want to? And I think there are career path discussions around what's a leader track versus a principal track and all that kind of conversation, which we discuss. But in the end, I think there's more than less for designers to develop hybrid skills to become leaders. So it's all positive in that respect. It's just how do you channel it and develop the skills and the career paths.
Yeah, I'd say I think the advent of the term design thinking has been nothing but good. We can all, you know, take hot shots at it, but I think it said you don't have to learn typography to be able to, you know, start working with design. Just as we learn, you know, and throw around concepts like Agile and we kind of all know what we're talking about, the rest of the business should feel just as comfortable talking about how design works, how processes around design and how principles around design work. And that's where we need to get to, while at the same time realizing it's a two-way street. You know, we need to have the technical competency so that we can imbue the systems with humanity and great design principles. We need to have the business acumen and be able to talk business to business as a way of framing design. And so it's a two-way street as well.
But I must tell you, with having been in touch with all the sectors of the industry, people in the consulting firms, particularly those 70 firms, you were one of them, that have been acquired by consulting firms, which you weren't. You were acquired by a financial fintech company. But the ones that are acquired by consulting firms, they do feel that they get brought into much fewer things because the consultants on the business side of strategists believe that they have design covered. So given that I assume Capital One, a lot of it is development, software development focused, haven't you seen situations where a developer basically doesn't, to Nathan's point, involve a designer in the agile process because they think they can cover it, or you haven't seen any of that in a development-centric organization?
I'd say more likely is the answer-driven culture of we have an answer to the case. And so a tendency for design to maybe be involved later in the stages than you'd like. And we teach a way of just how do you help someone convey to you what question is this the answer to? Because I will know a lot better of how to solve it with you if we talk about what question you were answering, because I will collaborate with you differently. We will arrive at different decisions than if you just give me the answer alone. So how do you treat the answer as a hypothesis?
Great. We are running over, so I think we should move to the clothing, which is workplace activation. So finally, and again, we are going to show here, because the report was trying to be solution-oriented, to Brandon's point, actually have the solutions. So it's brought everything together into this flywheel of design. But I would like to have your advice for the audience who have an interest in driving the full value of design. How do you bring it to life in the organization, particularly this higher level use of design, more strategic, more purpose-driven role for designer? So we show the flywheel, which has all of the four interventions we have talked about, that they need to work together to create momentum. But in the final round, I would like to say, what are your thoughts on how to start? Do designers lead the way? Does it have to start top down with design leadership, a CDO, or does it have to come outside of design, the other functions that help make designs better? So just perhaps one final statement, and you may add into that your final passion call that you want to leave the audience with as well.
Sure, I'll start. I think the tendency I've seen, regardless of we'd love to have that big design leader come on and change everything in an organization. The pattern I've seen is more likely it's someone who knows how to talk to the business, maybe from a marketing or product sense or whatever, but has a great passion and understands what design can deliver, makes space for it, and then eventually gives way to a CDO type of person who can lead design. I think the hard thing to do, but the thing that probably has the most leverage, is really paying attention to that middle, and how do you stand up a group of mid-level leaders who can really be those action aligners. A lot of time you have the craft people, maybe you get that senior leader in, but you're always missing that middle, and that's what really takes to have deliver a lot of the value, to maximize the value of design. And
what you want seeing from the report that you think is most compelling for you? So I should have mentioned that first.
I think it is both the additional lenses of being sustainable, just, and accessible. I think design has always played that lens, but I think you have to have that middle capability for design of action aligner to really bring that about.
Thank you. Who is speaking?
Should I go? Who's next? Shell, you want to go next, or do you want the last word?
I mean, no, I don't want the last word. I mean, my philosophy is just start. So, you know, it kind of doesn't matter. I think that you don't get anywhere if you don't start. And you don't get anywhere if you can't bring people along. And I agree completely with Brandon that it is really that middle layer of people that are being squished by business reality, and then also being told to operate behavior ways. And so being able to play those hybrid roles and help actually create space for people to move and practice and do their work in new ways goes a long way to transformation, at least in the environment that I can see.
And what's the report that you think is most relevant for you or most helpful for Ford?
I mean, it was validating, of course, to, you know, we've structured ourselves to have both this sort of activation role. We literally call it activators. My team are called catalysts, and then we have this role called design strategy, which is really navigating the business and the design practice and pulling all those pieces together. So it was actually kind of exciting as we've been sort of building this from the ground up and kind of feeling our way through dark, that there seems to be some support behind those ideas, and we see it working. So that's kind of nice. I was excited to see those roles called out.
Great, thank you.
So it's not the last word, because that sounds too ominous, but I would just echo and agree with the previous sentiment. The one thing I found really interesting was the executive vision partner role, which we haven't talked a lot about. Again, because it did validate the direction that Philips has been on. We have our role is called design business partner. So it was really interesting to hear that the 50 respondents in this survey, in this report, kind of validated the need for that role. But it's that unicorn in design of a really creative background person that has a strong business-oriented mindset that can be that super omnipotent seat at the table, but there are many seats at the table that need to be present in an organization. And I think that's what all of us are basically saying, is that there are a lot of different management teams in big complex organizations, and design needs to embed itself at all of those tables. And that's a lot of what this report has said. And to do that, designers as leaders need to have that business acumen and a different kind of track that they develop over time. And I think that's what's been new that I've seen and that this report is showing, and is validated kind of everywhere. And maybe your institution is now training that or demonstrating that, but that's basically what we see everywhere now, while maintaining craft throughout the design team, but you need that on top.
Wonderful. So thank you, first of all, our panelists, Shel, Brandon, and Nathan. And I think we have heard very clearly that design creates that space for a more inclusive approach to business. I think that's in the business role and these hybrid roles. Second, I think from a design point of view, from an internal point of view, I think we have heard about the increasing importance of the middle, so that it's really these hybrid roles that can do both. So I want to thank the audience. I would like to encourage you to go and get the report. You see on the screen where you can get the report. And thank you for participating. And we will also put this online on our website so you can watch it again or share it with other people. Thank you all for participating, and have a good rest of the day.